How are we doing for time? How long have I got, Barry?
You've plenty of time, don't worry.
Okay, right. So that's Richard Knoll looking very pleased with himself. And who wouldn't look pleased with himself with that lot of queen cells? But this is his thing. He makes a lot of queens, and he's got a successful YouTube channel. And one of the best things on there is how he does a cell builder. This is the grafting shed up in Scotland that Murray McGregor uses. His assistant Yolanta is the boss of that, and I did an interview with her, and that's in the book, and it's about how she raises queens, which is quite interesting. And that's one of my breeder queens, which I killed after only getting one lot of grafts off it, because my specialist subject is killing queens. I don't know how I do it, but I picked her up and I somehow managed to throw her on the ground, and I couldn't find her, and it was a disaster. But you know, these things happen. But the thing about raising queens, this is what Mike Palmer says. He says almost instantly that he started raising his own queens. The next season he could tell. I mean, what he'd been doing before was buying queens from the south, where it's warmer and they get queens earlier, and he was buying package bees and bringing them up to the north, and he had lots of losses and lots of problems. And literally the second he started raising his own queens, the next year he could tell it was that quick. He also goes on about he likes bees that supersede, so he has a number of queens that you can go around and see that the queen's changed, but they're still doing well. They're still making honey. So he's happy with that. He only changes queens when they're not performing or when they're getting old. And Peter Little, he's not so much a bee producer as a bee breeder. So he says, producing queens is simple, but breeding them is a totally different thing, because breeding involves control of both the drone and the queen lined, and it's much harder to control who your queens are mating with. So he uses isolated mating stations and instrumental insemination, but he's very big on you've got to be out there, you've got to have your hands in a beehive, you've got to see your bees, you know, month in, month out. You know, some bees seem great in the middle of summer, but get towards autumn and they turn horrible, whereas some bees are just always great. And this is all stuff that you need to know about when you're selecting queens. This is a graph I got from BeeBase on imports of queens. So obviously people like importing queens. I was interviewing a commercial beekeeper a few weeks ago, and he just says he's too busy. Like he can't raise queens, and so he just buys them in, and he buys them from Greece. He says if they didn't work, he wouldn't do it. You know, he says I buy these queens. I think they're mostly carniolan. They work. If they didn't work, I wouldn't do it. Having said that, I love raising queens, and I would rather that this curve was coming down, not going up, because there are risks with bringing in diseases and maybe queens that aren't suited to our environment. But we can't get queens mated until June often, so it's difficult. I mean, if you need queens in May, what do? You know, and that's why people are importing them. If the idea of raising queens is a bit scary, then it's a great thing to do as in associations, when you club together with maybe 4 or 5 other beekeepers and you all just pool your resources. That's a really good idea. And the Mike Palmer solution is to take queens through the winter as nucs. So he has loads of nucs made up in the late summer. they go through winter, and hey presto, he's got queens. He doesn't need to buy them. Simple enough, and anyone can do it. The only thing is with making queens, most people do, most beginners, they do the easy thing, which is my hive's swarming, there's loads of queen cells in it. I'll just take some of those cells and I'll make queens out of them. But I sort of think that's not quite the right way to go, because one of the things I'm trying to breed for is a lower swarming tendency. And I believe that if you keep on making new queens from swarm cells, you're kind of enhancing the swarmy tendency. So what I would rather do is find a good queen that's not swarmed, you know, where the colony is doing well and they're not putting up cells, and then breed off her. And I don't know much about Bibber, but they seem to be doing quite a lot of publicity lately about the improving bees and not importing. And I'm completely on board with that, except I don't have the same obsession with the black bee that some people do. I mean, to me, I just look at my bees, and if they're doing well, then I'll breed off them, and I don't care what color they are. But as I said before, we can't control the drone side of the matings, but we can select from our best queens. And that's, as Mike Palmer said, that works. The more hives you have, the more queens you have to compare, the more likely that you're picking a good one. So if you've got 1,000 colonies and you're picking 20 breeder queens, the chances are that they're going to be pretty good. Whereas if you've got 10 colonies and you're picking 2, you know, the selection pressure is not so strong, which is one reason why it's good to club together with other people. And you all have a look at each other's hives and find who's got the best queen. Equally important is getting rid of bad queens. So if you've got a horrible, stingy, nasty hive, do you really want the drones from that hive to go up into the air and start mating with other queens and sort of propagate that undesirable trait? I don't think so. So I believe it's just as important to, even though it seems cruel, I think it's just as important to get in there when you've got a horrible, nasty hive, kill the queen, scrape out the drones, and stick in a good queen. And I think that it can get a bit complicated selecting for millions of different things. So I think it's good to just keep things simple. And many people have said to me that if a hive makes a lot of honey, chances are all the other things are fixed. So if it had some sort of disease, it probably wouldn't make much honey. If they swarmed, it probably wouldn't make much honey. So in many ways, if you just find the colonies that make the most honey, as long as they're not evil, then they might be the ones to go for breeding. That's from a blog post I did recently, but basically I was looking at what's the range. I was looking at how difficult it is to control the drone side of the mating. So this is the queen, and this is 50% of matings apparently happen within a 2.5 kilometer radius of the queen, and 90% within a 7.5 kilometer radius. But within a 7.5 kilometer radius, I've got about 650 colonies dotted around where I'm based. And the chances of controlling the drones from there, it's just impossible. I just have to accept I can't control the drones, and that's okay. If I get a bad queen, I get rid. If I've got a good queen, I'll raise more from her. And it works. This is something that Mike Palmer told me, which I know has been in books. A queen with just an okay queen that's raised under ideal conditions will be much better than a queen from an amazing genetic stock that's raised under non-ideal conditions. So we can control, we may not be able to control what we have to work with what we've got. We've either got average queens or amazing queens, but we've got what we've got. But what we can control is the conditions that we raise their daughters in. And that means grafting larvae of the right age and grafting properly, i.e. don't flip them over. And they go into a starter hive packed with nurse bees that are well fed. That's Mike Palmer. He grafts in his bee truck, which looks a bit hard on the back to me, but there you go. And then that's from my book. This is the Mike Palmer kind of sustainable beekeeping philosophy. So I'll just quickly run through it. He's got breeder queens, so they're his best queens. He'll graft larvae from them, and they go into a cell builder. To make a cell builder, you need a frame of pollen and lots of nurse bees. So that the nurse bees come from sealed brood, which goes in the cell builder, and then when it emerges, you've got a lot of nurse bees. So rather than rob his production colonies, he has a whole load of nucs that are just there to provide resources for his cell builders. And it works really well because as these nucs grow, they get crowded and they would swarm. So rather than to stop them swarming, he nicks frames of brood from them, puts them in his cell builders. So that works well. From the cell builder, you get your sealed queen cells, and they go into mating nucs. And his mating yard is in a valley, and all around the valley, for miles and miles around, he has different apiaries. And he's the king beekeeper in his patch, so he knows that the area is basically flooded with his own drones. He doesn't know which hive the successful drones are going to come from, but he does know that the majority of drones in the air are going to be his, and they're going to be good. From there, you get your mated queen, and a mated queen will either go into a production colony to be sold or to make up more nucs, and so round it goes. So it's a kind of a feedback loop thing, that the nucs are providing the resources for the cell builders, and it means that he's sustainable. But to be honest, you have to be a big beekeeper to do that. But you can see why he's quite passionate about not buying in bees from outside. So quickly, the stages are: assess the queen performance over one or more seasons to identify breeders. Keep the breeder queens in a nuc, because the smaller the colony, the less she lays, the longer she lasts. When I went to Murray McGregor's, Yolanda had an old queen that was her favorite. It was 7 years old. So she was still grafting from it at aged 7. It died shortly after, but if they're in a small colony, they'll last a long time. You also need to graft. You have to plan ahead. So you're grafting 3 weeks before the mating flight. So so what Peter Little does, he basically grafts in mid-April, even if it's snowing, because he says that by the time it gets to the middle of May, it's perfect mating weather 9 times out of 10. So that's something to bear in mind, the planning ahead. Many ways of building cells, and many books on the subject. Those are the nucs that Mike Palmer has. I went and visited his yard. He's got a funny thing, like he has that column there is one nuc, and that's next to another column. So he has two kind of like giant tall nuc hives pressed together, but it works for him. ideal conditions, lots of nurse bees, pollen, syrup, and no queen, obviously. The other thing, as I noticed, is nearly all books on raising queens, they go on and on and on about making queen cells, which is actually quite easy. But they don't normally go on much about how you get from a queen cell to a mated queen, which is just something you find is, it turns out that's actually the harder part in my experience. Still worth doing though. This is what Yolanta told me is if it's the first mating nuke that you're doing in the spring or early summer, so it's just got foundation and bees, then she doesn't put a queen cell in that one, she puts a virgin. So she lets the queens emerge in an incubator and puts a virgin queen in for the first time. But then subsequently, once they've got that queen mated, and then you've got a little mini colony with a bit of brood and drawn comb, then after that she uses queen cells. But she uses a cell protector because they do sometimes nibble away at the edges. And if you want to know what a cell builder, that's what lots of nurse bees looks like. So that was from Richard Knoll. But that, when you've got that many nurse bees, you're going to have some good queen cells. And the thing about getting them mated, the easiest way is just to use a normal nuke with a full-sized frame, like a frame of brood, a frame of bees, and then chuck the queen cell in there. But the thing is, if you're making, I don't know, 10, 20 queen cells, then that means you need 10, 20 mating nukes. So that's a hell of a lot of frames of brood and bees that you're going to have to take from your other colonies. So, which is why people tend to use the baby mating nukes, which are cheaper and they need fewer bees, but they are harder to manage. And of course, it all depends on the weather. So I was surprised to hear from Yolanta in Scotland, Murray McGregor's queen breeder, that she waits 2 weeks. If she sets up a mating nuke and in 2 weeks they're not laying, she chucks them out and starts again. But I think they've got quite a short period of time in which mating's possible up in Scotland. But I think most people would give them 3 weeks, which is what I do. So if you haven't got a laying queen in 3 weeks, just accept defeat, chuck them out and start again. And that's one of their little apideias, the 3 frames. And the way you do it is you put these bars, you put them in, you can put a little bit of foundation on them, and then you chuck a cup of nurse bees in. The way you get nurse bees is I shake supers. If you've got supers above a queen excluder, then obviously the queen won't be up there. You can shake them into a tray. The older bees, if there are any, they'll fly off, and what you'll be left with is a tray of younger nurse bees that are just crawling around. Scoop them up, stick them in the mating nuke, feed them syrup, and then you seal it all up and leave it overnight somewhere cool. Then the next day, take it to the mating apiary and stick in your queen cell or your virgin queen, and then check in 2 weeks. So the summary is there's massive benefits to making queens. The biggest benefit is it's fantastic fun. I absolutely love making queens. And it's so wonderful when you're going through your colonies and you know that queen was you made her, you know, or you helped the bees make her, shall we say. And smaller beekeepers can club together to share resources. And if you don't want to do that and you want to buy queens, buy from a local beekeeper. There will be people locally who make queens and sell them. And the more that you ask for them, the more they'll make. And they'll be local queens. So that's a good thing. And then read up on the different methods and pick the one that works for you. So this is the simplest thing. To make 10 queens, just put your grafts into a nuke, which has got a load of nurse bees shaken into it, a frame of pollen, frame of stores, and just leave them alone for 8 or 9 days. You don't necessarily need to have a starter and a finisher. You just chuck a bunch of grafts into a nuke, come back 8 or 9 days later and take the cells away. Hey presto, you made some queen cells.
Steve, just to let you know that you've been talking for about 45 minutes now. So
oh, okay.
Where you want it to be in time.
Okay, well, really quickly,